And at this time, probably the reason many of you are here, we're very honored to have with us this evening our final speaker. I think we read in the brochure and the literature and the newspapers that his talk this evening would center about what took place in following World War I in Marash, where it was actually a turning point in history. He was there, he was in Eintop, he was in Aleppo, he later taught at the American University in Beirut. And as we heard about his manuscript recently at the NAASR office, my mind certainly went back to my parents, and I'm sure those of you that are my age, to your parents. And I think more than anything else, we realized over again how courageous and brave and persistent they were. And we're also very proud of you. And I'm sure there are many of you that would like to be here at this moment introducing our honored speaker. And it so happens that I have the privilege this evening. I wish you all were with me. It's an honor to have him with us. We asked, and he came. He was ready to come a few months ago. We had a few problems in setting up our date, and very patiently and kindly he held off. And we're so very happy to have him with us this evening. And so I won't delay any further and introduce to you Dr. Stanley E. Kerr. Dr.
I feel it a great honor to have this privilege speaking to you. And I want to thank the board of NAASR and its chairman, Mr. Manuk, for the privilege. I feel somewhat like an imposter. My own son, who's a professor in California, when he found I was writing this book, said, "Dad, write your memoirs, but don't try to write a history." He knew that I was a biochemist and that my publications had all been in the field of carbohydrate metabolism, brain chemistry, and so forth. So the strange thing is, when the book was finally published, or finally accepted for publication, the editor told me he wanted to send it to two people who could criticize what was in it and see whether there was any mistakes. In other words, get the criticisms before it was published rather than second. And one of the two critics is my own son. It was my surprise. I wasn't the one who selected him. One critic said my book was a curious melange of personal memoirs and history, and that's what tonight's address is going to be too. I had prepared an address on the lighter side, talking about incidents in Marash which were somewhat amusing, although most of them were serious. But when I read the published title of my address, Marash, the Battle of Marash, a turning point in history, I had to do some revision. Now, it would take half an hour to do either one, so I'll watch the clock. And I think first I'd like to talk about the Battle of Marash, compressing the history to such an extent that would shock any historian. I can't stop to give details, but I'll have to summarize a great deal. First of all, people ask, why did you ever go out there? Only those of you who are over 60 would remember the name Near East Relief. Your children probably haven't heard about it. This organization was raised in 1915 thanks to efforts by Ambassador Morgenthau in Constantinople, who communicated to President Wilson what was going on, what the Turks were doing to the Armenians, and begged him to get some organized relief established and help sent over there as soon as possible. And although some people have made the statement that this organization did little and what they did was too late, when I tell you that money raised in the United States on behalf of the Armenians was being distributed by German missionaries in Aleppo and Hama in the fall of 1915, I don't say that that was too late. And as far as the amount was concerned, the organization had voted $100,000, promised to raise $100,000, a week after Morgenthau's cable had reached President Wilson. But before they had disbanded, they had raised $116 million, all of which went to the Middle East. One family gave $23 million. Can you imagine? Now, I was recruited from the United States Army. When I say that I was a lieutenant in the Sanitary Corps, you can understand why I was sent out there. Anyone who has been in the camps at Hama or as far south as Tafili in the Arabian Desert would know why a Sanitary Corps recruit would be taken. Well, I won't bore you with details. I reached Aleppo in the spring of 1919. Our organization, of course, could not go to Turkey until the war was ended. And I arrived there at the time that the refugees who had been exiled into Syria, chiefly from Cilicia. And in fact, those who went to Deir ez-Zor, you don't find many of them here tonight, I'm sure. Most of them were killed. But those who went to Cilicia were more fortunate, about 50% survived. And they were coming back from those camps in Syria, up through Aleppo and back into Cilicia, their homeland, when I arrived. Now, the work of the Near East Relief then in Aleppo was one of rehabilitation, temporary nature, for these people who were streaming northward. They had the opportunity to clean up, to get clean bedding, clean clothing. Children were housed in tent orphanages. The adults in the great military barracks in Aleppo, some of you know it, which could house 10,000 people. It was a moving population moving north. And in a few months, the work that I've been sent out to do, which was chiefly clinical biochemistry in the laboratories of the hospital, plus minor duties elsewhere, my work came to an end. And I begged the director, I said, Dr. Lambert, who was the director of the area, who cares about his blood sugar level when he's in danger of having his throat cut or he's starving to death? There's much more important things to do than blood chemistry. He said, I agree with you, go up to Marash. And I arrived in Marash in December 1919, but had a temporary assignment at Aintab, November the 4th. By pure luck, it was the date for the exchange of troops between the French and the British. Now, I have to dwell on this event because it has a great significance. Why were the British there, and why did they go out and let the French come in? Back in 1916, Great Britain, France, and Russia had come to a secret agreement, which we call the Sykes-Picot Accord. It was an agreement for how they would carve up the Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire, after the war, if they won the war. Now you can imagine plans made in 1916 weren't necessarily going to be very fitting for 1919. By 1919 or 18, when the war was ended, France was bled white. Her people were war-weary. Her country had been devastated. And the population were just about as much interested in occupying Cilicia as we are in occupying Vietnam. It was the same situation. Even the parliament refused to give money for maintaining the army, let alone enlarging it. I mention this because when the time came for the French occupation, it came too late and it was too weak. First of all, when Allenby defeated the Turks in Palestine in October 1918, the only French contingents in his army, in that force, was the Armenian Legion, 4 battalions, and a group, I don't know how great, of African troops, that is Senegalese and Algerians. So when the defeat came, Allenby said to the French commander, here, your country is supposed to occupy Cilicia. You don't have any force to do it. I'm going to attach your troops to my army. We, the English, will go in, or the British will go in, as they did, occupying Urfa, Aintab, and Marash. The Legion was assigned to the railway to guard from Islahia to the tunnels of the Taurus, those anti-tunnels. In fact, I arrived by train from Aleppo, by freight car from Aleppo, passing through Italian troops at Adalia. Italy had taken a slice of the Ottoman Empire. The Greeks had landed in Smyrna. The British were in Aleppo, and Armenian troops along the railway. Now, when I went into, then I must say why the delay occurred in the occupation by France. these first troops that went in were, in other words, the French troops that went in were, none of them were French. They were either Armenian or Algerian or Senegalese. It was only in November the 1st, 1919, in other words, more than a year after the victory by Allenby, that a real French army went into Cilicia. Now, why the delay? General Allenby was afraid the French would fight the Arabs because Great Britain had promised Syria both to the Arabs and to the French. There was a certain demarcation between the two territories, but it wasn't clear, and both sides claimed it. And so Allenby was resisting the French occupation. Clemenceau, the French premier, wasn't interested. He would not even answer the cable sent by his High Commissioner in Beirut, who was the same Georges Picot who had made this treaty, the Sykes-Picot Treaty. So, after an unduly long delay, France and Great Britain came to an agreement. France gave up some of the territories she was supposed to get to Great Britain, and Great Britain said, bring your troops over, but limited the number. They had 6 weeks to get into Cilicia before the British got out. And it was on the very day that I entered Aintab that exchange took place, November the 4th, 1919. I went on to Marash. The exchange had already taken place. Now the Turks were astonished to find that the French forces coming in were Armenians. You can imagine, here are the people they thought they'd exterminated. And here they are coming at the head of an army. It was 4/5 Armenian, 1/5 French, one company of the regiment that had fought at Verdun, and the rest the legion. A few Spahi cavalry, there's the Algerian cavalry. Now, I read the Turkish history of this whole account. We don't find it anywhere else. Their reaction to this entry. It was the same time that Mustafa Kemal was leading the nationalist revolution, what became the War of Independence for Turkey. So I was present, actually, you might say, at the Battle of Lexington, what corresponded to the Battle of Lexington in our War of Independence in the United States. The Battle at Marash was the first test of strength of Mustafa Kemal's nationalist movement. Now, we who were there, knew nothing of this. We merely had heard there were bands of guerrillas, or cheta. The word cheta means bands, incidentally. So when I speak of cheta, it means the guerrilla fighters, not in uniform, but armed, well armed. Mustafa Kemal had been sent to Anatolia by the Sultan's government to disarm and disband the 9th Turkish Army. However, his intention was to lead a war against the occupying powers, the French and the British. Only a few of his friends knew his real intention. Now, I shouldn't dwell on this part of history, except that it shows the existence of this movement wasn't even known to the average people. But the Turkish historian tells how in Marash, he gives the date and the house in which a group of Turks met and swore to support Mustafa Kemal, made an oath, and they had a very detailed organization throughout the entire city, and also a system of communications. Now, Mustafa Kemal sent to Marash to guide and direct this movement one of his bosom friends and a very clever Kurdish captain named Kulij Ali the Sword. I met him. He's a very genial, bearded fellow. And he was smart enough not to try to fight the French, but to hamstring them by preventing any supplies or ammunition reaching them. He made his camp at Bazarjik. Those of you who are in Marash know where Bazarjik is, at the crossing of the Aksu, where he was in a position to prevent anything coming up from Aintab or from Islahiya. And one by one, any French convoys were destroyed. And of course, gradually, the French general in Marash, General Kerr, became alarmed and realized that his real enemy was this brigand chief, as he called him, Kulij Ali. So a new batch of troops, the 412th Regiment from Verdun, a famous regiment, commanded by a Colonel Thibault, had just arrived, and 2 days later was commissioned to clean out Kulij Ali at Bazarjik. Thibault studied the supplies available and found that there wasn't nearly enough to make a campaign such as that, let alone defend Marash. In other words, the French did not have ammunition enough to do anything, either to defend Marash or to capture Kalajali. He therefore sent out 2 convoys, empty wagons, 34 wagons to Belpunar, it's a halfway point between Islahia and Marash, another convoy to Antab, and then he ordered the Antab garrison to send another convoy to him. In other words, there's going to be 3 big transports of materials to Marash. Now, our car, our nearest relief car, had a mission in Antab that very day. They were to go and pick up 2 YMCA men. There was going to be a YMCA in Marash in what we know as the Karathani, or the reading room, next to the German hospital. And with him was coming the international director of the World YMCA. We didn't know that both of them had been slaughtered below Antab on their way from Aleppo to Antab. But before the car reached Karabukla, the Black Beard, or Black Mustache is the name of the village, the driver, a friend of mine, heard firing and soon found himself facing a battle between the Cheta in the rocks and the Algerian escort for this convoy coming from Antab. They turned, of course, got back with the steering wheel shot out between the driver's hands, and both the driver and the other man in his front seat wounded, not seriously, and reported the incidents to General Kerr. He was furious, sent out a big squadron of cavalry to support the convoy coming from Antab, not knowing it had already been destroyed. And the next morning he called to his office all of the Turkish officials and the leaders of the Muslims. At the same time, he ordered his subordinates, each one, to seize a certain strategic point in Marash. One, the government house, another, certain intersections. The Turks were already planning to do the same thing. Now, at this meeting, he held 5 of the officers as hostages. He told them first, I'm going to put a French advisor over every government officer, and it's up to you to bring this Kalajali to justice here in Marash. They said, if you are so strong, why don't you do it? You know, they were insolent to him. And just at that moment, a courier came on horse from one of those who'd been sent out to protect this convoy, came back, the convoy is completely destroyed, and the escort with it. Now, the one that went to Belpunar, it had set out on Christmas Day. I think it was Armenian Christmas Day, January the 19th, or I think by the Gregorian calendar, the 6th of January. That convoy reached Belpunar without any incident. Why? Because it was empty. The Cheta were watching them, saying, why don't we wait and get them when they come back, rather than, in other words, loaded with ammunition and food. Shall I speak louder? I'm a little bit hoarse, but if you can't hear, I'll try. The Belpunar convoy also could not get back. They never got a single wagon into Marash. In other words, the French were completely cut off from supplies. Now, that morning I had gone to the market to buy food for the orphanages. I came back shortly after noon, finding the stores all closed and Turks everywhere armed, moving towards the Citadel. I got back in my residence next to the headquarters of the general in the American Mission compound, when suddenly 5 or 6 shots were fired, and then machine gun fire and rifle fire over the entire city. It was a signal given by, after the conference with the general had been broken up, the general released a number of the men, and it was they who gave the signal for revolt. And the French, who'd been sent out to capture the strategic points, found that it had already been captured by the Turks. In other words, they were too late. Now, I won't go into further details about the fighting, except to say that after 2 weeks, the only Armenians left in the city were in 6 different strategic centers, plus a few isolated houses where people stayed throughout the entire thing to defend themselves. But in general, there were neither French troops nor Armenians left in any except 6 points. I won't take the time to name them. The American Mission compounds 1, 2 Catholic churches, Beit Shalom orphanage, and I think the Bulgurjian house, which is one of the Bulgurjian Hill You Karakians and Bogojans and Safarians will know who that is, but it is, commanded by Satrap Karakian, formerly a major in the Turkish army. Now, the general had taken a defensive posture throughout the entire thing. And some people explain that by the fact that he spent the entire war, World War I, in a German prison camp. He'd been made a prisoner early, and they thought that this had lessened his aggressiveness. His second-in-command wrote, Thibault, that if I had been in command, if I had had the liberty of action, I would have taken a more aggressive posture. Now, the only hope was reinforcements from outside. There was no communication whatever. The wireless set belonging to this 412th Regiment had been kept in Beirut. General Gouraud, the top commander of the area, had kept also the heavy artillery and the Algerian cavalry. There was not even carrier pigeons. The only method was to send out couriers. The general asked for volunteers. 6 Armenian legionnaires volunteered, were dressed like Turkish gendarmes, disguised as your Turkish gendarmes, given Turkish arms, sent out on horse with a message for help to Adana, where the area commander resided, General Duffiot. One of them got through. The others were killed. We Americans sent 2 Zaytunlis to Hajin with messages. That message got through after the fighting was over. Now, when General Duffiot Adana got the message, he hadn't heard a thing of what was going on in Marash. He realized he must send a powerful force to help. And he cabled to General Gouraud in Beirut. Now, by pure chance, Gouraud had just formed a strong column to teach the Turks at Jarablus and Urfa a lesson. He was going to send them not to fight, but just to show a force. They were already on the way to Mersinna and Alexandretta. And so he said, take this force, commanded by Colonel Roman, and go to Marash. Afterwards, he will go to Urfa. They were in trouble. Now, you can imagine the rejoicing of the Armenians in Marash when they see this powerful column approaching the city. I wanted to make this point. My real motive in telling you some of these things is to show why the French failed to hold Marash. The first was, of course, the slowness in sending troops. Second, inability to get in supplies. Third, the Turkish nationalist movement, very well organized. And what was the thing I just mentioned now? Oh, this force. This next point that I make will clear my point. One of the worst things that could have happened to the Marash garrison was what Colonel Roman did first. He wanted to use all of his force to fight the Turks. So when he got to the southern end of Marash at dusk, he sent scouts to see if they could reach any French officers. They found in the church of the 40 children, I think Karasul Manouk, is that right? The French troops, or rather African troops, commanded by Major Corneloup. He ordered Major Corneloup by messenger to withdraw from the city and take care of protecting his camp, that is, Roman's camp, so that he would be free to fight. Corneloup said, I can't do that, I'm responsible to General Perret. Colonel Roman now sent a written order. If you do not have orders to the contrary, come out, abandon the city, and come to my camp. Corneloup felt that he had to. Now, the next night, after he wasn't able to do it that same night, but the next night, Badveli Abraham Hartunian, whose father, whose son Vardan is here with us, wrote, it was only morning when someone came to him and said, Badveli, all the troops, legionnaires, have gone, secretly at night. The same thing happened at the Catholic church, Sur Purgich. The bishop Abadis Apiarian wrote about this incident, and Raphael Karakian, who's there, Satrap Karakian, wrote about it. They woke in the morning and found the place empty, except for wounded. And no one had been told. In other words, they were going without warning the Armenians. These were Corneloup's troops withdrawing from the southern end of the city. This was to be disastrous for Marash. Now, the next day, Colonel Roman attacked the western area of the city, capturing what we call St. Toros Hill. I think some of you know that. The Turks called it Merzinet Tepe, and made that his headquarters. And in the afternoon, he had seized that by 10 o'clock in the morning. By afternoon, he had cleared a way to the barracks in the northwestern corner of Marash, so that by dark, a courier could get through to General Kerr. And he brought the most amazing order. You are to evacuate the city. Imagine now, here's a colonel, the Reedley poem, telling a general who's in charge of the city what to do. Of course, we knew nothing about this. General Kerr was very unhappy about this. No one was told about it. The next day, Colonel Normand attacked in force the western area of the city and cleared what you know as checkered area, Kulaji, Kurtlu Quarter, and so forth, so that by noon the Turks were on the run. There was no further resistance. And he could see them running from out the other side of the city to the north. That afternoon, we, in the mission compound, the nearest relief had mission buildings at their disposal, we heard a rumor that the Turks had sent a letter to us asking that we intervene as mediators and ask the French not to kill their women and children. In other words, they thought the French would do what they would do. If they were the victors, they would kill everybody. And we heard all the contents of the letter, but did not get the letter. It had come to the hospital. The next morning, there was panic in the American mission compound, about 1,500 refugees there. And they came running to us saying, the French are leaving. Oh, we said, you're silly. Why should they leave? They just won a victory, a major victory. The Turks have gone. In fact, your father states that he was very disgusted to find that people, refugees in his church, were out looting the Turkish houses. In other words, they could go move freely in the city. So, an hour later, we were surprised, we Americans surprised, to be called to a conference in the mission. And a Major Rose des Ordons, met us, and he, first thing, Mr. Lyman, the only male member of the mission, said, Major, is it true? Is there any truth in the rumor that you're leaving? Unfortunately, he said, yes. An order has come, meaning from Normand, that we should evacuate the city. We don't have the strength to hold it. And you had better go with us. You'll all be killed if you don't. But don't tell the Armenians. Now, the charge has been made and denied by the French. I heard that with my own lips, with my own ears, excuse me. He said, if they try to go, none of us will get out alive. Lyman said, why, they're ready to surrender. They have written to us to intervene. What do you mean? A letter. Where is the letter? And Lyman didn't know. It was assigned to me to find the letter. I went down to the hospital. I wasn't without some danger, of course. From there, I was told the letter was thrown over the wall from the house of Hanafi Effendi, near the Krothani. Well, who has it now? Well, ask Garibed Bilozikjian. I got to his house, which meant crossing Government Avenue. He said, I don't have it. He had seen it, but he didn't have it. A letter had been sent to him. The Turk had said, please give this letter to Garibed Bilozikjian. I found, without telling you further, I found the letter. The man who had it denied having it. I said, I know you have it. Give it to me. He hesitated, pulled the letter out from the door. You Americans keep out of this. He held the letter for 12 hours, and that 12 hours cost, I would say, 1,500 lives, because the people who fled later to Islahia wouldn't have had to flee. Because later, a peace which could have been arranged was just about 6 hours too late. Now, that night, General Kerr himself, with one person to show him the way, went on foot around the military barracks from the seminary, over to, across the Octary, down across to St. Horace Hill to confer with Colonel Normand, his junior. He could have sent someone, sent Colonel Normand to me. But he went to Normand, came back, and told his officers, it was midnight, the colonel has agreed to a 24-hour delay, or rather, till noon tomorrow. Well, I should have told you that when the letter was shown to Kerr from the Turks, I've told you the contents, he said, send immediately, ask them to send a representative to discuss terms of peace. And we will try to get a delay in the evacuation. So Normand and Kerr had agreed to wait until noon the following day, hoping that the emissary would come. If peace is made, we will stay. If it isn't made, we evacuate that night, the following night. No one came, due to the fact that there was a delay. Now, I learned later the nature of the conversation between the two officers. Norman said, "I have accomplished my mission. I was sent here to defeat the Turks. I have done it. I have to go to Urfa and do the same. My troops came without food. Their column had been sabotaged at the very beginning. 250 camels had been collected to carry food and munitions. The gendarmes who guarded them had let 130 be dispersed. I think probably it was not let them, but they had dispersed them themselves. In other words, they were agents of the nationalists. So the general ordered priority be given to the munitions, and never mind the food. They can live off the land, kill cattle, and get grain from the villages. So Norman says, I have no food, my animals have no food, the temperature is 16 below zero, that is centigrade, and my men are freezing. In fact, there were 250 amputations made, some of men with both hands and both feet. In other words, he had good reason to say, I have to go. The question was then up to General Kerr. Did he have to evacuate the city? There was munitions enough for 4 days of fighting, no more. The whole southern end of the city had already been evacuated. Suppose they made peace, and then the Turks see that Colonel Norman, with his powerful column, leaving. What would they do? Of course, they would return to the fighting. And so he reluctantly agreed that he had to go. And I'm sure that he knew that it meant disgrace for him. He was disgraced. Now, that night, the troops began to move as soon as it was dark. I was assigned to go to the German hospital, what we call the German hospital, and take it. There was 100 patients. The doctor and the nurse were leaving with the French. When I went down there after dark, there were 6 patients left in bed. The rest had all gone with the French. And while I was there was knocking at the door, and here was the Turkish emissary come after the French, have half of them gone. Dr. Mustafa, a leading physician of Marash, and leader of the Turkish nationalists. With him was a boy, about 18, carrying a white flag. They said, we've come to talk with the general, talk terms of peace with the general. We sent him up to the college, and I learned later from Mrs. Wilson, the wife of the director, Mrs. Lyman, that's Bessie Hardy at that time, who talked with him and sat with him, that the conference had taken about an hour. General Kerr, of course, had a bluff. He couldn't say, we're leaving, because they were trying to leave secretly to avoid being ambushed on the road. Now, anyone who says that, for example, the barracks was burned purposely by the French forgets that their whole motive now was secrecy. So they avoided telling anything to the doctor, Turkish doctor, that would give him a suspicion that they were not going to stay. He even dictated the terms of peace. Take these to your commanders and bring back an answer tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock to the hospital. I was trying to carry my patients up to the college so I could be with them. And then on the road in front of the seminary, who should pass me but horsemen? Here's the staff officers, General Kerr, all the majors on horse, the last to leave. They stopped and said, we have just had a conference with the Turkish representative. He's to be at the hospital tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Someone of you Americans should be there. Give them our apologies. In other words, they'll be pleased to know we've gone, but please apologize for us, for our deception. And then the officer said to me, would you please take this sergeant with you, a French soldier who had his arm amputated and was too weak to travel and didn't want to sleep with the other wounded in this little hospital. So he and I went down to the hospital in the back door, intending to spend the night there. The front door was blocked. We always went through a hole in the wall and then through the back door. And as I entered, I stumbled over the feet of the body of someone sitting in the corner with his feet sticking across the doorway. In the dark, I could see a white bandage, bloody, on the man's head. Shook him, found he was dead. I said to the sergeant, it's an Armenian, he's been wounded, trying to follow the French. Came here for help, and there's no one to help him. He died here. Well, there's enough dead around, so it wasn't too unusual. An hour later, in fact, we had to go repeatedly to the door to tell Armenians who were fleeing from the Franciscan monastery where the French had gone, which direction to go. And when I carried a lantern to the door the next time, here was another body on the other side. They had been there both all the time. If I had known who they were, I wouldn't have remained in the hospital. It was Dr. Mustafa and his boy. And the next morning when we found who they were, only when Dr. Wilson and Mr. Lyman came down to interview the Turks, I had covered the bodies with sheets. Well, he said, what have you got under the sheet? I said, somebody was killed here or wounded here. He pulled the sheet off the first body, and there was a boy sitting on the floor, a bullet through his forehead into the wall directly where he sat. He'd been shot sitting down. The other was Dr. Mustafa, had been shot through the head. The bullet had gone through a door and then into a cupboard the next room. You could trace the exact line of the bullet and see where the assassin had stood to shoot him. And there was another bullet hole. It was a pistol bullet in the wall. So we reconstructed the incident this way. They had been chased. Instead of going back to their own quarters, they had taken refuge in the hospital, thinking it was safe. And as the pursuers came in, Mustafa shot and missed. His pursuer turned, killed him, and then the only thing remaining was to kill the boy. The patients in the hospital upstairs, when they went up, were pretending to be dead. They were so scared. The next day I said, what happened? He said, there was one shot and then somebody crying, I'm on. And then there was another shot and there was silence. In other words, 2 people had killed these men. It took me 5 years to find out who did it. And a number of people have claimed credit for it. But you can imagine what a position it put us in. We had invited them. They were killed in our building. Wilson and Lyman agreed, we have to tell them, the Turks, before they come and find out. And they both marched out the front door of the front gate, knowing that anyone who had even peeked through a window on that side had been shot instantly. But and they told me, go back to the college, tell Mrs. Wilson, and tell Miss Hardy, Mr. Lyman's fiancée. An hour later, they appeared at the college, heading a platoon of gendarmes. They had found the Turks had fled the city the same night, and they had to send messages to College Ali and some other officers to come to the city and talk to the Americans. They told them the French had gone. They said, oh yes, we know that. They were trying to trap us. We left the city too, on the opposite side. 2 armies running away from each other. And when they finally learned it really was a retreat and they were not coming back, they were so overjoyed that the news of Mustafa's death was not so important. Mr. Lyman then said to College Ali, you have a custom, the man who brings good news has the right to ask a favor. Is that right? I'll do anything you ask. Stop the slaughter of the Christians. College Ali turned to his officers and said, pass the word there's not to be another shot fired. Now, the Turks didn't obey this. Those around Perkage know that for 24 hours more, they had to defend themselves, headed by Sekrat Alakian, against the Turks nearby. However, I believe it was the death of Mustafa and the need for us to go to the Turks, and that promise of College Ali's, you have to do me a favor, which saved the remaining population because they were prepared to kill all the Armenians. Now, I think I've taken 3/4 of an hour already, and it's time to quit. I had hoped to tell you just a little bit about the evacuation of the orphans after the fighting and my illegal smuggling of gold out on behalf of the Armenians who remain. But that will have to remain for you to read in my book. Thank you very much.
I'm taking the liberty of keeping you here a little longer, and this is the conclusion of the evening. I'm sure if there are any questions from the floor that maybe Dr. Kerr would be happy to answer them for you, and those that might have babysitters or have to rush and move along, we would understand that. Are there any questions?
What was the name of the family that gave the $24 million?
I'm not sure that they would want this to be known. All of you have heard of the Phelps Dodge Copper Corporation, I think. Cleveland Dodge was the president of that organization. It was he that organized the first Near East Relief Committee. He paid all expenses of operations, organization, administration in the United States. And I've heard privately that the family, his son was president of the American University of Beirut, under whom I served. I've heard that they gave $23 million, the Dodge family. That's not the Dodge motor car, but the copper Dodges.
Who killed those two? Is that a secret?
Yes.
I see.
Dr. Mustafa's sons have vowed, if they ever know which family was responsible, they will follow them to the ends of the earth
I see.
and kill them. I know, I was told the only story that clicked with the facts. In other words, people have told me how I killed him or so-and-so killed him, and tell me a story that is completely out of keeping with what I told you tonight about the circumstances of death. The only one that clicked was one that fit all the facts, and from two sources, confirmed by two different individuals. And when they told me the names, I said I won't write them because it was in danger of the whole family.
I see. All right.
I can tell you privately if you want.
I'll see you after.
Another one?
Were they Turks? Were they Turks themselves, those who killed him?
No, well, I can tell you this. There are Armenians fleeing from the Franciscan monastery, following the French. They passed Mustafa, recognized him, and then they agreed. He is witnessing the French evacuation. There will be an ambush if they get back alive. We have to kill them. In other words, it was a motive, a good motive for them.
Dr. Kerr, when will your book be published?
I've been told it's to be published by the New York State University Press, that it should be out by July next summer.